We're looking at some numbers today that are, well, they're just staggering. In the U.S., we're seeing over 115,000 firearm-related incidents every year.
Every single year. It's an immense public health issue.
And that translates to more than 73,500 emergency department visits. It's actually the second leading cause of death, right behind motor vehicle crashes.
That's right.
But the thing that really jumped out at me is that our whole approach to treating these injuries is it's getting a fundamental update.
It is. The old mental models, the things we learned for decades, are being completely rewritten by better data and, frankly, a better understanding of the physics.
And that's our goal today. So I want to start right at the beginning, the trauma bay. We all learned ABC, airway, breathing, circulation. But that's not the protocol anymore, is it?
It's outdated for this kind of trauma. The new standard is XABC.
So what's the X?
The X stands for exsanguination, and it has to come before everything else, before airway, before breathing.
Okay, so X before A. We're drilled that the airway is king. If you can't breathe, you die. So why does bleeding jump the line?
Massive external hemorrhage is the absolute fastest killer in these situations. You can lose your entire blood volume in just a few minutes.
Right.
So think about it. An open airway is totally useless if your intravascular volume is gone. You can push pure oxygen into the lungs, but if there are no red blood cells to carry it,
There's nothing to deliver it to the brain. You're just ventilating an empty system.
exactly, you're ventilating a corpse. The priority is to stop the clock on that physiological collapse. You have to plug the leak first.
Because if you spend 2 or 3 minutes on a tough airway while a major artery is open,
You've already lost the patient.
okay,
Yeah.
priority 1,
Yeah.
stop the bleed. That takes us right into pre-hospital care. Let's talk about tourniquets. The data was really specific on the mechanics here, the high and tight philosophy. There was another tiny detail that I thought was brilliant, the red tab, the pull tab.
Yes, the orientation.
It's supposed to face the heart.
Why?
Why does that tiny detail matter?
It's all about leverage. Pure biomechanics. If the tab is facing away from you, you have to push the strap to tighten it. You're weak when you push away from your body.
Your core isn't engaged.
Right. But if that tab is facing the heart, facing your core, you pull the strap toward yourself. You engage your back, your biceps. You can generate so much more torque. And you need that force to literally crush the artery against the bone.
Pull toward the core to save the core.
Yeah.
Simple. Okay, so what about wounds you can't tourniquet? Groin, armpit, junctional wounds? We have to pack them.
We do. And there is a huge misconception about what wound packing actually does.
That the gauze is just a sponge to soak up blood.
Exactly. That is the wrong mental model completely. We are not cleaning a spill, we are building a plug. The goal isn't absorption, it's pressure.
Internal pressure.
You are filling the permanent cavity, the hole, so tightly that the gauze itself pushes back against the bleeding vessel from the inside.
The volume of gauze required for that. The numbers I saw were just shocking.
They are. A large thigh wound, especially an exit wound from a high-velocity round, can be a massive space. You might use 2 full rolls of combat gauze.
And in the sources, I saw numbers as high as 16 yards of gauze.
Up to 16 yards, yes. It's an almost unbelievable amount of material.
That's from an end zone to the 15-yard line for one wound.
And that's where people fail. They put a few feet in, they see blood soaking through, and they think it's not working. No. It's not working because you haven't filled the cavity yet.
So you just keep going.
You keep packing until you cannot physically fit another inch in. You pack it until it feels like a rock, then you hold pressure on top of that.
Pack it until it feels like a rock.
Yeah.
That's a powerful image. And it leads us to why the cavity is so big. Let's talk physics. Why is a rifle round so much more destructive than a handgun round?
It comes down to one formula. Kinetic energy equals 1/2 mass times velocity squared. Ke equals 1/2 mv squared.
Okay, let's break that down. You've got mass, the bullet's weight, and velocity is speed.
Correct. But look at the math. Mass is linear. Double the mass, you double the energy.
1 to 1.
But velocity is squared.
So if you double the speed.
You quadruple the energy. Triple the speed, you get 9 times the energy. Velocity is the overwhelming driver of damage.
And all that energy gets dumped into the body. This is where those 2 types of cavities come in, the permanent and the temporary.
Exactly. The permanent cavity is the easy one. It's the hole the bullet physically crushes and tears as it passes through. It's the track.
But the temporary cavity, that's where the velocity squared part really shows its face.
That's it. It's a radial pressure wave. Imagine a speedboat flying through the water. It creates a huge wave. A high-velocity bullet does the same thing inside the body. It violently shoves tissue outward away from its path, creating a temporary space that can be 12 times the diameter of the bullet.
So it stretches everything.
It stretches tissue beyond its elastic limit. The cavity forms and collapses in milliseconds, but the damage is already done.
And some organs handle that stretching better than others.
Far better. Elastic tissues like muscle or lung can stretch and rebound pretty well, but solid, low elasticity organs. Think about the liver, the spleen, the brain. They're more brittle.
So when that pressure wave hits the liver,
It shatters. It literally fractures. You can have catastrophic tearing in an organ that the bullet never even touched just from the shock wave. That is energy transfer.
which means you absolutely cannot just look at an entry and exit wound and assume a straight line between them.
Never. That is a dangerous, dangerous trap. Bullets do not fly in straight lines inside the body.
They deflect.
They deflect off bone, they start to tumble end over end, which we call yaw, and that creates a completely unpredictable, massive path of destruction.
And you mentioned bone. This is another detail that stood out. The body's own skeleton can become a weapon.
We call it secondary shrapnel, a high-velocity round hitting a big bone, like the femur doesn't just break it, it pulverizes it. Those bone fragments become little projectiles themselves.
So now you have a shotgun blast of bone shards tearing through tissue on top of the bullet.
Precisely, all going in different directions. So the visible track is just one data point. You have to have an incredibly high index of suspicion for hidden injuries.
Let's shift to surgical decisions. This idea of selective nonoperative management feels like a huge change.
It's a massive cultural shift. 20 years ago, a gunshot wound to the abdomen meant a laparotomy, period. Now we know that about a third of them, 1 in 3, can be safely managed without any surgery at all.
1 in 3. That's incredible.
There are 4 mandatory pillars. You fail one, you go to the operating room. First is hemodynamic stability, no shock, no vasopressors.
Makes sense. Can't watch someone who's unstable. Second,
No peritonitis. On your physical exam, the abdomen has to be soft. If it's rigid, board-like, that means something has leaked. You have to operate.
okay. Third pillar.
A reliable mental status. This is the one that often gets overlooked.
Why does their mental state matter for a belly wound?
Because the patient is your best monitor. You need to do serial exams. You
Okay.
need them to be able to tell you, hey, this hurts way more than it did an hour ago. That's your alarm bell.
So if they have a head injury or are intoxicated,
You can't trust their exam. Their feedback loop is broken. Or if they have a distracting injury like a shattered leg that's screaming with pain, they also don't qualify. You operate because you can't monitor them.
and the fourth and final pillar.
No major gastrointestinal bleeding or evisceration. If their guts are out, you operate. If there's lots of blood from their stomach or rectum, you operate.
So if they pass all 4 checks, stable soft belly, clear head, no big bleed, then what?
Then they get a contrast-enhanced CT scan. That is non-negotiable. You have to map the bullet's trajectory. You need to see where that energy actually went.
And there were 2 specific red flags on the scan to watch for, right?
Yes. A right-sided thoracoabdominal wound is a big one. You're worried about the liver, but especially the diaphragm, and hematuria blood in the urine. You have to specifically check for kidney or ureter injuries.
Okay, let's get to the question every single patient asks. The bullet, do we take it out?
The answer is almost always no. We leave it in.
That's so counterintuitive. The movies always end with the bullet clinking in the metal pan.
Pure Hollywood. The reality is chasing that bullet often causes more damage than leaving it alone. You're cutting through traumatized tissue, the zone of injury, just to retrieve a piece of metal.
You create more damage for no real benefit.
Exactly. It just increases morbidity, infection risk. It's not worth it.
But there have to be exceptions.
3 specific ones. First, neurological impingement. If it's pressing on the spinal cord or a nerve, it comes out.
Makes sense. Second,
A vascular threat. If it's floating inside a major blood vessel or sitting right next to one, threatening to erode into it, we take it out.
and the third.
If it's inside a joint space or floating in spinal fluid, synovial fluid in a joint will break down lead and cause lead poisoning over time. So if it's in a joint, it has to be removed.
Otherwise, it's a souvenir. Okay, last topic.
Yeah.
Antibiotics. How do we manage infection risk?
We stratify based on energy transfer again.
So for a low-energy wound, like a handgun,
Generally just local care and a first-generation cephalosporin like cefazolin. or clindamycin if there's a major penicillin allergy.
But for high-energy wounds from a rifle, it's a different game.
A completely different pathology. Remember that huge temporary cavity? It devitalizes a massive amount of tissue. It stuns or kills it.
Creating a breeding ground for bacteria.
Exactly. Dead tissue is bacterial fuel. So these patients need 24 to 72 hours of systemic antibiotics. But, and this is the crucial part, antibiotics alone are not enough.
You can't kill your way out of dead tissue.
You cannot. The surgeon has to be aggressive. You have to go in and debride cut away all that dead and dying tissue. You have to remove the fuel for the fire.
It all comes back to the physics, the velocity.
It dictates everything. The protocol, the packing, the surgery, the antibiotics.
Okay, let's recap the big shifts. First, it's XABC. Stop the massive bleeding first.
Stop the clock on death.
Second, mechanics matter. Tourniquets go high and tight. Wound packing is about immense volume to create pressure.
Pack it like a rock.
Third, the physics. Velocity is squared. The energy transfer creates a temporary cavity that's far more damaging than the bullet track itself.
Respect the velocity. Always.
And finally, we're selective. Not everyone needs surgery. The SNOMS checklist is key, and we almost always leave the bullet in.
That is the modern evidence-based approach.
This has been a huge update to the mental models we all carry. It's not just about treating a hole.
That's the core message. It's about managing the energy transfer.
A perfect final thought. When you see your next trauma patient, think about managing the energy, not just the hole.